If you have 30 years of dictatorship, if you have two wars, one in 1980 to 88, Iran-Iraq, the second one in 1991, and if you have one illegal invasion in 2003, if you have 13 years of sanctions and you have 4 years, close to 4 years of occupation, how much can a nation endure, I ask you? How much can a people carry on their shoulders? This is a nation that is completely traumatized. I challenge you, and maybe you can challenge me when I say there is not one single family in Iraq today that isn't somewhere affected by what has happened in Iraq. Everyone has either lost somebody, somebody's in jail, somebody is maimed, somebody is mentally disturbed. The incidence of mental disease when I was in Iraq during the 1998, 99, 2000 period, WHO, World Health Organization, already published reports about the increase of mental disease among children in the ages up to 15. It will be much, much worse now. I don't have the figures, but I don't think it's difficult to imagine. So how much more can this nation carry? What is challenging to me today is to quantify a little bit this human catastrophe. It was politically convenient by everyone, by Saddam Hussein, by the British, by the Americans, by the Spanish, by the Italians, and by many others, to sort of make a cocktail and put everything together, all the causes, all the effects, and then you can pick and choose how you want to argue. Well, we mustn't allow that. The academic community mustn't allow that. We as citizens must not allow that. And we can separate what goes into what substance relates to the dictatorship, what substance relates to individual members of the Security Council, and what substance relates to the 15 members of that Security Council as a whole. Very briefly, again, superficially, what goes into the account of Saddam Hussein is very clear. The big picture is painted. We know about the brutality of this dictator. We know what he did with the Kurds in northern Iraq. We know about the Anfal campaign in the mid-90s of the Iraqi military. We know about what happened to these wonderfully, peacefully living marsh Arabs in the southern part of Iraq, a beautiful area, well, rough living, but still a very serene area at one time, where Saddam Hussein, for various reasons, relating to oil, relating to the border, relating to their opposition to him, played havoc with a people. We know about the assassinations of Shia clerics. So the big picture is there. What goes into the account of the occupying powers, I think the deposits are still made every day, because they're occupying, and the atrocities that are committed, they continue. That's not being anti-American at all. It's just a fact. We have seen it, we have read, we have listened to people. You have Canadians who are traveling there with great courage. Thank God the Peacemaker team has been released, but they will have stories to tell. So I don't want to spend more time on that. But I do want to turn to the account of the United Nations Security Council, because I interacted with this council. I met with them fairly regularly, not often enough, but I met. And I want to just say what turned out so badly illegal had a legal beginning. You cannot march into another country and think you get away with that. So when the Security Council decided to pronounce sanctions, that was absolutely correct. But then, for various reasons there's no time to go into, if you want to ask or discuss, it became very quickly illegal between the period of 1990 to 2003. And the price was paid, of course, by people who had nothing whatsoever to do with that political conflict between a government and the international community. There's a saying, an Afghan saying, which I like, which is, grass doesn't stay under the rocks. If you lift a stone, and you will see earth, but you won't see grass. The grass comes out on the sides. The facts are coming out, and they're coming out in great clarity. And the almost 2 years that I spent to reflect on my time in Baghdad, to reread the debates in the Security Council, to study the statements that were made by government representatives and the peace movement and CARE and Caritas and the many fantastic international organizations that try to stem the tide, have given me figures, have given me also the conviction that I can look at you and say things which, right after I resigned, I had a lot of feelings and I had a lot of views, but I didn't have the confidence that I really had the figures under control. Now I think I do. But let me just say here, before the sanctions began, 25 children under 1,000, 25 children under 5 per 1,000, the UN reported were dying for various causes. Then came the sanctions, and when I was in Baghdad, UNICEF published the figure between 100 and 120 children per 1,000 were dying in Iraq. So a tremendous increase. And the gap between what happened before the sanctions and during sanctions cannot be explained, even though Washington and London want to explain it in that way. They cannot explain it, that this was because of a dictatorship and Saddam Hussein. It's simply not true. He has done a lot of evil, but he cannot be held responsible for that. The Canadian figure, by the way, is 5. In Canada, 5 children per 1,000 under 5 have, this figure has been very stable over the last years. Where do I get it from? From the UN Human Development Report. Anyway, I could give you now a whole list of examples in different sectors: electricity, education, water, sanitation, where things went from bad to worse as sanctions proceeded. And if you look at these indicators now, they're getting from worse to worst, because it hasn't improved. My friends in Baghdad tell me electricity 3 or 4 hours. When I lived in Baghdad, electricity, we had sometimes 8 hours, sometimes less, sometimes maybe an hour more. But now it is worse than it was before. Water supply is poor. Sanitation is atrocious. So nothing has improved. And ladies and gentlemen, these are, what I'm telling you here, these are not speculations. These are, as far as the period of sanctions are concerned, these are all facts that can be looked at, that can be, you can do the work yourself and find out what the story is. In this period, when children died at such an increased rate as I mentioned, the United Nations Security Council decided to take 30 cents out of every oil dollar earned and send it to Geneva to compensate individuals, firms, and governments for alleged losses as a result of Iraq's invasion into Kuwait. That is okay. There is nothing really wrong with that. That people who lose, there were a lot of poor workers in Bangladesh and in Iraq, from Bangladesh, from the Philippines, from all kinds of countries, Palestine, and they lost their meager savings and they needed to be compensated. But what I so strongly object to is that out of the $18 billion that were paid up to the end of sanctions for compensation, 15, the major part, was paid out to firms and governments that really could have waited easily a little bit longer until the minimum needs of a nation were satisfied.